Hi, my name is Waleed Ahmed, and I'm the Principal Product Manager for Oracle. In today's session, we'll cover DBA's best practice for protecting data privacy with Oracle data masking. Today's agenda, what I'd like to cover is data privacy challenges, talk about the privacy of database and cloud, and then dive deeper into DBA's best practices for recommendations, examples, and new features such as at-source data masking. So data privacy challenges. The key question here is, what are the risks associated with high-risk data? In that case, the first question you'd have to ask yourself is, do I have high-risk data? And once you do ask that, you then say, well, where is it stored? And once you've identified where it's stored, you say, how do I protect that sensitive data? To this end, we'll talk about the solutions to these challenges. So the solution would be to data mask the data in accordance with replacing the sensitive information with realistic but yet obfuscated data, data that cannot be identified to an individual or a person, and so forth. And also a requirement of subsetting or reducing the size of the data while maintaining relational integrity of the data. Combined together, these two solutions will provide you the secure application testing that Oracle's data masking and test data management solution provides. So with Oracle data masking and test data management, along with it, the product goes a methodology. And the methodology is important to understand just as much as it is to understand the product. The methodology here defines itself by finding where the data resides that is sensitive, then assessing in how to mask that data, and then executing and securing that data, and then testing, validating whether the methodology you used, i.e. the formatting of the data, and we'll cover this in the next slides, really gives you the data that is masked and yet is referentially intact so that your application can continue to work after you've masked the data or subsetted it. So let's talk about privacy in database cloud. These days, there's a lot of talk about cloud. We know that the cloud enables customers to deploy their applications in an atmosphere that allows expansion of data, which is being provided in Gartner researches, where 50% of global companies will have customer data in the cloud. And within this customer data, there's sensitive data. There's been a great expansion, a very large expansion, an explosive growth of data within cloud because it allows to easily deploy applications within the cloud system. Okay? Now, given that, having immense amount of data inside the cloud will also increase the average cost of breach, which was identified in one of the research studies. So, hence the title, Cloudy with a Chance of a Breach. So this becomes a serious dilemma for DBAs and testers and QAs, and also business people who are responsible for this data. Non-production databases is being deployed within the cloud in full size, and it's rapidly growing. So, question asked is, how do you secure the sensitive data? But before you go to securing the data, how do you identify where this data is in the cloud and then secure it? So the methodology, coming back to it, we call it the Find, Assess, Secure Test with the famous acronym of FAST. Finding is locating where the data is, and then assessing it, right? Classifying the sensitive data. Is it a first name? Is it a social security number? Is it a last name? Is it a driver's license number? These are identification that can point to an individual and hence classified as sensitive. And then decide according to business rules and regulations or both in how you want to format the data or mask that data so it becomes obfuscated, non-identifiable. And then to test it, execute it, and see whether it really does translate to how you wanted the original data to be transformed into a masked data set. Talking a little bit further and diving deeper into the product, how the product provides that facility of masking the data with the FAST methodology. First of all, you configuring the data, which means to find the sensitive data in your environment, you need to provide a search criteria of how to get it. And that's where sensitive type identification and application data model comes into the picture. We'll talk about that. Then actually discovering it. So you said, this is what I'd like to search for in my environment. And within this environment, search for it. So there's a configuration and there's a discovery. And then finally, there's a classification, where you take your business rules or the regulation and mask the data in accordance with those regulations and business rules. So you've defined what your sensitive types are, you've defined where to discover them, and then you define how to mask the data. And then the execution part, when you become production and you start executing it. Well, there are different formats of execution. There's different ways of executing masking within Oracle Data Masking and Data Subset to provide you the flexibility and the capability of performing these type of executions. So let's talk about how Oracle Data Masking provides the facility of discovering sensitive data within your environment. As you can see on the slide, you will see that sensitive column discovery searches for sensitive column types that you've defined, and then goes out, looks for a pattern matching, and brings it back to you. Once you get to see, okay, these are the discovered columns that may contain sensitive information inside the database, inside this table, inside this column, then it gives you the option to actually tag it, whether it is sensitive, or you can just simply ignore it and say, no, this is not really sensitive. Even though it matched the criteria, you know your data best. It provides the capability of shrinking down, finding the needle in the haystack, and giving it to you. Is this really a needle? Is this really the needle that you're looking for? And if it is the sensitive column type, tag it and save it into your application data model. So the next step is evaluate, which I just discussed, which is once the sensitive column discovery delivers you a list of sensitive column matches to the sensitive column types, you can then save it into an application data model, basically a repository within Enterprise Manager, which is detached from your database. So storing the sensitive column types that have been identified by the discovery and then tagged by the DBA and saved within the application data model. Now this application data model also holds the entities, i.e. the tables, and the relational references between the entities, and also the sensitive column types. Assessing. Now you want to sit down and say, well, what are my business regulations? Here's a sensitive column type. I like to mask this. But how do I mask this? What is acceptable? In that case, we provide out-of-the-box format libraries that gives you the ability to choose from one of these, instead of sitting back and saying, well, how do I create a change in this data to another value which is not related? In addition to the native format types that is available out of the box, such as masking a column with random numbers, fixed strings, or even as complex as creating SQL expressions that will mask the data based on an external condition to the column itself. So, for example, we'll cover a use case later in the slides. Also, we understand that sometimes customers would like to create their own customized way. After it's masked, they would like to do some custom processing after the masking occurs. In that case, we provide a post-masking step available which you can integrate within your masking process. We also included the pre-masking. So before the actual masking occurs, you have the ability to run some customized, specific to your needs process, mask the data in accordance with data masking, and then run post-masking steps. Now, in addition to data masking, there's also data subsetting. You have the ability to say, okay, I'd like to mask, but before I mask, I want to create a subset of my production data to deploy to test a subset of it. But at the same time, I'd like to mask it as well because I'm using it for test. With Oracle Test Data Management and Oracle Data Masking, these two solutions are integrated to one another. You can define a subset criteria and say, extract my data from production. And then you can say, mask this by using this data masking definition within the same workflow. And then out pops an export dump file, which you can simply import into your test environment. Now, the execution of the data masking, I just described to you a way of executing in a production database without affecting the production data, which was export a subset, mask it without affecting production data, create a dump file, take that dump file, and load it into QA. There are other ways as well, where you can say in-place masking, Well, if you have a criteria where you take the entire production database, clone it, and set it up in a staged environment where no one else has access to it, it's restricted because it's production data, you can mask that data in place if that is needed. You can also mask heterogeneous databases. So if you have SQL Server and DB2 and all these type of other databases, you can mask that within Oracle data masking. So the objective is that the data sprawl is within the cloud environment is increasing considerably, as you've seen in the slides. What this means is managing your sensitive data becomes that much more imperative, and making sure that you are aware exactly where the data resides. Now, we understand that the greatest risk and vulnerability of the sensitive data within production within the cloud is from within. So making sure that you have a solution and a methodology that fits to identify the product, i.e. identify the sensitive columns fast, and then go into assessing it, securing it, and testing it, making sure it's acceptable. Let's talk about data masking best practices for DBAs. Over the past few years that I've been working with this product, I've worked with several customers that have come up with ideas and understanding what is the most efficient and effective way of using the solution in their environment or masking sensitive information within the environment. As you know, there are three methods of executing masking, data masking. There's in-place data masking, where you have an entire production database in a staged environment, you mask in place. Then there's at-source masking, which is, I don't really have a test database, staging database. I really don't have a staging database, but I have a production database. I want to take a small portion out of it and mask that, a small portion of the data out of it and mask that. In that case, what you would use is at-source data masking. You would simply run data masking within your production database, not affecting your production data, and creating an export dump file which is masked. The most secure way of masking is in this format. And then there's heterogeneous masking. Now, for best practices for a DBA, each of these methods requires certain settings to be most effective and most efficient. And we'll just cover those. Okay, so when you're doing in-place data masking, make sure your hardware configuration is up to par. A lot of times customers forget that when they take a production database, which is maybe a very large database, gigabyte, terabyte, whatever, a huge amount of data, and it requires masking several columns. They would take a clone of it and put it into a staged database. Now, the staged database usually is not up to par as production database. So recognize that you're going to mask data on a staged database that has resources not up to par with production, obviously. So make sure the I/O is tuned if you want masking to run fast, and there's sufficient RAM. Additionally, configuration of the database. Some of the items here correctly sized as GA. And then utilize the parallel execution capability within data masking, and set the degree of parallelism accordingly. Application schema, make sure the statistics are gathered correctly. And that's important to understand, that we generate and then run a process inside the Oracle database in your staging environment to mask the data. And that provides us with the flexibility and as well the performance unparalleled by our competitors. At-source data masking. It's important to understand that when you're running at-source data masking, you're running it on a production database. Even though it doesn't affect the production data, you need to take better judgment in understanding that I'm going to run an export dump file that would mask the data. You wouldn't want to run an export of your biggest table during high peak business hours, would you now? Similarly, you wouldn't want to run data masking on your production database when you're in the peak business hour. You would run it off peak hours. And then the data masking definition. Make sure you've tested it. Because when you have at-source data masking, just like in-place data masking, it'll run, it'll create a data dump file. In that data dump file, when it is masked from production data, you simply import it, then you will come to realize, oh, this is the format of the mask. Well, if it's not the desired end result of the format of masking, then what you would want to do is make sure that you run a test in place, make the data masking definition to a point where you're acceptable and you understand the outcome, and then run it. Heterogeneous data masking, a common subject. We provide the solution of heterogeneous data masking with Oracle Database using Oracle Database Gateway. So Oracle Gateway is the way to go, best practice for DBAs to do heterogeneous data masking. It provides the most efficient and performance, the most performance of taking data from non-Oracle database, masking it, and sharing it in non-production environments. And these are certain key bullet points that show items that you need to consider. In addition to that, within Oracle Database Gateway, for specific database versions, here for the first parameter you'll see it's valid for 11.203 and above. Okay? So in this case, set the init parameter of the gateway init parameter file. Set it accordingly so you can get the maximum amount of throughput from your data masking process. Fetching the data out of non-Oracle database into an Oracle database is performance, with better performance by using these parameters. Okay? So let's talk about an example, use case. I hear that customers, when they look at source data masking, they say, well, we don't want to run it on production, but it's cool. I don't need to have an intermediary database, right? The staging database, where I copy my production data out of a very secure environment into kind of a staging environment. In that case, we provided an alternative solution, which is using data masking, at-source data masking in a snapshot standby. So you have your production database, and then you have a replica of your production database you're using Oracle Standby technology. Now what you can do is, let me move the slide forward. Now what you can do is you can take that physical standby database, which is currently a snapshot standby database, and it's recovering, right? Convert that physical standby to a snapshot standby. Basically, it allows you to open up the database while providing a guaranteed restore point. Execute at source masking. That means we're not changing the data within the standby database, but what we're doing is exporting the data that is required to be masked and create a dump file. As you can see, what follows next is once you've created your dump file that is masked, and that can also be subsetted, so you can use at source data subsetting, right? And then integrated with data masking, now you have a dump file. So having said that, once you've completed your data masking test data man, you can just simply convert your snapshot standby database back to a physical standby database, and the recovery continues from where it was left off. So you have not affected production, you've gone over your standby database, and you have utilized at-source data masking on a non-production database. Now, key point here is, even though you're avoiding not going to production, you are still getting the most recent data because the snapshot standby database, or the standby database, was recovering up to the point in time where you converted it to a snapshot standby database. Okay? And then the final result. You have the export dump file, which is masked and or subsetted, and imported into non-production environment and shared. Another example that I worked with a customer out in Europe, and this was an interesting example where it was a government agency, and what we had to do is mask data in a table based on another table column. Well, you say, okay, so, well, this criteria went a little bit further. It says mask the data in a column a certain way based on a value in another column. The whole idea here is it's based on a logic that resides in another column. And that's how I want to mask it. And this is what this user case defines. And I'll show you the flow. So the flow was mask the actor name in the actor table. Of course, the table name has been obfuscated to protect the innocent. So in this case, the actor name was masked based on an actor role, and depending on what type of masking utilized in the actor name. Here you can see the actual code that was used. You can define case expressions within data masking to format your masks, to format your sensitive data. You just don't need to just replace every single column row as a blank or a fixed number. You can go as complex as having logical deduction based on a value, or based on an input or multiple inputs. So you can see here that the role ID, PK, TK, or FO, if the condition is not in another table, then the column in the actor table needs to be masked. Otherwise, leave it alone, don't mask it. And this is the process followed. Customer was extremely happy that we provided this. So let's move on and wrap it up with some new features in Oracle Data Masking. So what we've provided in Oracle Data Masking are a combination of what we thought is intuitive enhancements to the product, and also taking feedback from customers on when they use these solutions in their environment. We recognize that they have certain demands which will fit many customers. So in that case, what we've done in Oracle Data, I've divided it up into 3 sections. In the last section, in data masking, in the first section, in the data masking, where I see the ability to select columns within your data masking definition. If you can imagine thousands of tables in your database with hundreds of columns that need to be masked, and you create a data masking definition, trying to search for a column in your data masking definition can become time-consuming. So we provided a facility where within a data masking definition you can search for a specific column or search for a sensitive column type and see those. In addition to that, for manageability purposes, what you can do is for the same data masking definition, you can enable disable. What does that do? Well, if you disable columns within the data masking definition, when you generate it, you would only create the script necessary to mask the data that is enabled, the columns that are enabled. And then expanding the capability of masking across all different column types. Here we provided the capability of clubs and blobs masking, where you define a regular expression based on your criteria, and you look for that in a club, and you replace that. Not just one occurrence. If there are multiple occurrences within your club, and your regular expression matches that, we will replace that individual while keeping the main club intact. For test data management, the enhancement we provided was adaptive referential sizing. One of the key requirements for a customer was, with test data management, i.e. our subsetting solution, was that when they defined a criteria to subset the data, they wanted to know how the subset criteria traversed through all the tables that were relationally linked to each other. So we provided a tree-like structure as by rule of the subset. So when you define a rule for a subset, there will be a tree-like structure that will show you this is the traversal path of the subset. And if a customer, if a user wanted to say, well, I'd like it to go as deep as possible, but then the last 2 tables I really don't want to include. So you can simply uncheck them, and they will not be included in your subset. And lastly, masking and subsetting templates. We provide the capability now in the new as part of the new features is downloading templates through self-update. This provides the ability for our customers to get the latest and greatest subset templates or data masking templates out of band of releases of Enterprise Manager. So as soon as a template is available, you can simply check through self-update and download them and start utilizing them in Enterprise Manager in your environment. And completing today's session, because we left it on subset templates, the currently available subset templates are Oracle Enterprise Manager, for Oracle Enterprise Manager data masking is eBusiness Suite template, and also Oracle Health Insurance Back Office, which is available for Enterprise Manager 12c. That concludes today's session. I appreciate you joining me. DBA's best practice guide for Oracle data masking, securing a database environment, and I hope it was useful.